Greetings and thank you for joining us at FutureMoneyTrends.com. I have a very special guest today. He is a champion for liberty, individual sovereignty, and has helped awaken millions of Americans, including myself. I voted for him in 2008 and 2012, and looks like 2016 even got an electoral vote. We have a great show for you today. So let's get right into this with our guest, former Congressman Ron Paul and host of the Ron Paul Liberty Report. Congressman Paul, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Nice to be with you, Daniel.
Mr. Paul, I wanted to talk to you about President-elect Trump, because he has had an attraction, just as Bernie Sanders did, to a lot of the people who were supporting you. And the way I approached it from day one when Trump started doing after I watched him do his probably second or third stump speech, was I almost looked at it as the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And I'm going to admit, day-to-day life, I teach my children the peaceful nonviolence of anarchists, as well as being a libertarian-minded. But Trump did appeal to me because the enemy of my enemy could be my friend. And so let's touch on that with the Fed. And then Yellen raising rates might even incite Trump to be more aggressive against the Fed. Do you think Donald Trump could be aligned with the liberty movement when it comes to potentially auditing and having real change in the Federal Reserve?
Well, let's hope so, but I'm cautiously optimistic, and not very optimistic, because I think Trump is a smart guy, and I think he knows the danger of the Federal Reserve, but he also is a realist. He knows what markets are like, because he has said good things like, well, we ought to know more about what the Fed is doing, and the interest rates are too low. And at the same time, he said that it would be very bad to lower interest rates now. It might precipitate a recession. So he's sort of all over the place, but he does have good instincts. I think he knew there were a lot of us out there that thought the Fed was a culprit, and he was able to capitalize on that by endorsing the Audit the Fed bill. And we'll work the best we can and encourage him to do it, and we're going to really work hard in the Congress to get Audit the Fed bill passed, but it's a big deal, because the power establishment do not want to reveal what they do overseas in particular, and how they bailed out the whole world 4 or 5 years ago. So that's it'll be a real challenge, but I'm pleased with the fact that he has shown some interest, and I'm pleased that people like you keep talking about it. This is so different than it was prior to 2008, so I think this is very good that the Congress is even talking about it, and that Trump has, but we have a ways to go before we're optimistic and say, we're going to have sound money again. That's going to take a while.
Speaking of sound money, have you seen anybody in his cabinet or his inner circle that you respect, that you think that could do some good being in his inner circle, either for sound money or being in the liberty movement? Actually,
maybe bits and pieces, but no one person that would probably see the world as you and I might see it, that there is a principle. I don't think if you took that group of people, they're brilliant investors, they're very wealthy, but if you took 10 people that he's appointed so far and say, would you please explain the non-aggression principle and how that applies to government? I don't think their eyes would glaze over, and if they did know, they probably wouldn't want to tell you, because it would be such a challenge to the system. So no, I don't have any one name, but I think that you're going to have people right now. You'd have to say that Trump is very libertarian on promoting lower taxes and less regulation, so that's good. And yet there are other times when he talks about torture and a few other things, you say, where is he coming from? So it's the problem is the appointees, as well as the president-elect, as well as Washington, D.C., they come from a different principle. They don't have a basic principle. Their principle is utilitarianism, pragmatism, management. It's people that make the difference. It isn't like reject, the use of force by government or as an individual. They don't approach it that way. They approach it more management, and they know that communism and fascism and Nazism is all very, very bad because it's excessive. But they live in a world that's been around for 100 years, and they're convinced that total freedom, total laissez-faire capitalism, doesn't work perfectly. It leaves too many people, short. They don't realize that it's only a free market system with sound money that takes care of the most number of people and raises the standard of living the highest. They say, no, you need government for this. You need government to do this, and you need it to do that. And, I can't conceive of, no Federal Reserve. Of course, the world is engulfed in central banking. So I think that's what we face, and that is why I'm more encouraged by you reaching out to people with some sound economic ideas than I am with saying that in the first 6 months we're going to see, a real revolution in Washington. It's too much to expect, but everything that they do, we do have some people like Justin Amash and Thomas Massey and several others, my son. They're going to say and do the right things, but they're not going to bring it about. And everybody talks about a revolution. Well, I don't think we're quite close to it. The revolution has to be with the people that you talk to. You're closer to understanding the revolution when you talk to the people you do with your program, because they need to know it. People in leadership has to understand what it's all about. And the politicians are latecomers. It doesn't originate there. You don't all of a sudden have a majority of the members of Congress that say, okay, we're all for doing this. We're going to repeal every single drug law. But what has happened on the drug laws? We've reached the people. All of a sudden, the states have nullified federal drug law. So that is done through education. That's what I'm excited about. But I don't have a whole lot of hope that the Washington, D.C. is going to change significantly. I think there's still going to be a lot of power in the next administration and a lot of pretense that they just need better managers. No, we need less managers. We need the people to manage their own affairs, spend their own money, and run their own lives and mind our business and not tell other countries what to do. That's what we need. We don't need better managers, and we don't need any more tinkering with tariffs and things like that.
Congressman, when you were in Congress, was it like what Donald Trump had described the politicians for the most part? Are they sticking with ideology, party, or are they just doing what their donors tell them to do?
Well, it's mostly partisanship, and they stick, and then the partisanship is usually not very principled, because you get a Hillary Clinton who should know what progressivism is, and some parts of progressivism is good because they're better on civil liberties and they don't like as many wars. Now, Sanders, was better on that, but everybody just think how strong the Democratic Party was to excluding the Sanders supporters and supporting Clinton, who was a neocon. So yes, the everything's up for sale, and it's both parties. And from the very beginning, when the race started, I said the two parties aren't different; they're all the same, and nothing really ever changes. And I thought, well, as time went on, I thought, well, this has to be different. Just listen to Trump, and go after Hillary. We're going to put her in jail and all that. Guess who shows up to the inauguration? Bill and Hillary Clinton. And that to me sort of said, well, I better go back to my original assessment. Nothing ever really changes, because overall policy, they're not, the new administration is not going to get rid of food stamps, or say that we should be out of the housing business, or we really should, reduce the amount of government medical care or the government involved in education. It's not going to happen. We just have to hope they get little things, emphasize the positive things, and get more people to understand what we're talking about, because this thing's going to come apart. And the only thing I think that counts is, where will the people be? Will they follow a leader who wants to, be a dictator, or are they going to follow the principles of what were laid down in our Constitution and by the founders? And there's a big, big difference. And that, of course, is where I'm optimistic, because I think we're reaching more people than ever before. I think the liberty movement is alive and well, but I don't want expect people to think, well, how many are in Congress? Well, several, but that's secondary to what's happening in the country. I was started in this in politics in the early 70s, and nobody even knew the word libertarian. 72 was the first time there was a libertarian candidate. So it's all massively growing. Hardly any talk of true liberty from the 30s up to the 70s, but by that time we started having more and more organizations, like the Mises Institute and Independent Institute. There's many of these institutions now that are talking about the right thing, and we can't even measure them. I mean, you have a large number of people that listen to you, and but what we need are more people like you, reaching more and more people, and there's so many out there I can't keep track of them, and that's wonderful. That we don't even know who's doing what, but it's out there. The internet helps us, and it's just miraculous us getting information out, and yet we have to worry about how the government's going to crack down on our internet programming, which they're capable of doing. But I think the freedom movement and the cause of liberty is alive and well, but we shouldn't be naive and think that we've turned a bend and things are going to be just great in 6 months. That's not going to happen.
Sure. Congressman, there's a lot of optimism. I've talked to a few of the large prepper-type websites. Their sales are down 90% since the election. Talked to the bullion dealers with gold and silver. Their sales are down. So there's a lot of optimism. And there's money going into the major indexes in the stock market. When you see that kind of change, what does that kind of tell you the first year in office? Are people in for a shock? Because it seems that looking at the bond market and any changes Trump does, that would actually lead to a systemic crisis, since really everything is perceived normalization, right?
Yeah, I think people are so hopeful and desirous of better things to come, and Trump is a very positive person in the sense that I can take care of you. I'm going to do this. I am the boss, and we're not going to let things happen to you. And that's a mixed blessing. If you'd have somebody talk like that and say, what I am going to give you is your liberty back again, and you're going to have your money to keep, and we're going to get rid of all the regulations, and we will have sound money. There's so much difference. But Trump comes across as a very positive person. People feel good about it. The stock market is reflecting that. But I think it's very, very risky. The spending is going to go up. It's going to put pressure on the Fed because the deficits are going to explode. They're going to spend more money on the military, which we don't need. They're going to rebuild all the bridges and roads, and that's nothing more than a boondoggle of passing out funds and all the corporations making money. So the deficits will go up, and the Fed is going to monetize. And one of these days, they're going to lose confidence in the dollar. But the dollar's strong because all the other currencies are even worse. And the telltale sign for the dollar is not so much will the pound and the yen destroy the value of the dollar. It's going to be when will what they are doing destroy the purchasing power of our money. And it's already going on. They don't admit it. They say they're praying for and working for 2% inflation rate and everything's going to be okay. That's insanity. First, that's immoral and wrong, and it shouldn't have benefited anybody to argue the case for 2% inflation rate. It's already much higher than that, especially the people that are living, on a low income. Their inflation rate, if they have to buy, get repairs and pay for medical care or books or something like that, the inflation rate is much, much higher. So I think people have been deceived into thinking the markets are way over optimistic. I'm talking about the stock market. Actually last year gold was not so bad. It was up 8 or 9%. There were worse investments last year. For emergencies, I keep a CD around, but my CD didn't do as well as gold did. I mean, gold was much better, and it was sort of a recovery year because several years it's been down. But I think we're moving into an age right now with gold. I've witnessed and been very much involved in gold going from $35 to $800. Think of the percentage increase. Of course, it corrected back down to $300. Then it went from $300 up to $1,800, and then it corrects and goes back down to $1,000, $1,100. But I think right now, after this several years of drifting downward, and with last year perking up, I think anybody that's selling gold now would be foolish, because they're going to print money. Matter of fact, they don't even have to print money. The money has already been printed. It's sitting there. It's sitting there in the reserves, and it's starting to move out, and people will start spending that money, and I think you're going to see big-time price inflation, which is quite a bit different than the definition of inflation, because inflation should be limited to increase in the supply of money, and governments always want you to think inflation is when prices go up, because they don't want you to look at the Federal Reserve and their responsibility for creating the conditions that we don't like.
What is gold's role, in your opinion, in the world, and do you think the Federal Reserve actively looks at its price?
I definitely think they do, and the markets decided that gold was important for 6,000 years, and they've also decided that paper never worked. But if you wonder about it, I was in Congress in 1979 during my first tour in Washington, and that's when gold was up $700-800, and interest rates are 15%, and it just happened that I had a special breakfast with Paul Volcker, and I had one staffer with me, and we went in. It was a private breakfast, which was a little bit unusual, but I was pleased to be able to do it. So we walked in, and Volcker's chief of staff, he was there, and he met, and we were gabbing, and then in walked Volcker. And so I thought the first thing he would do is, come over and shake hands and say good morning. He wasn't impolite, but he would immediately went to his staffer and says, "What's the price of gold?" So yes, they do watch it, and they do rig it. And if look at how they rig gold artificially at $35 an ounce, pretending that the dollar was as sound as gold. And then finally that broke loose in 1971. So yes, they cannot control it forever, but if they can keep it down and let gold go up more gradually, they have more control of the market. So I think they're right now do it differently than just selling the bullion like they did in the 60s and early 70s. I think now they're probably very much involved in the gold market, in futures, and getting people to dump gold. I mean, that's why they don't want a Federal Reserve audit, is because they can create credit out of thin air, and their friends overseas and the banks, they can provide dollar credit, and tell them to go out and, buy gold and sell gold and manipulate it. Right now we have $52 trillion worth of dollar-denominated debt in the world, and it all depends on people having confidence in the dollar. Now, if this confidence that we have today lasts for another 10, well, if you say, well, it's going to last another 50 years, well, it means that we can live for free. All we have to do is print money. But there is a limit, and nobody knows when it comes. It's a subjective thing. People finally lose confidence. But it's also very wise to look at the facts, and the facts are that in the past, when you print too much paper against a hard asset, you can't maintain it. The hard assets go up and demands more of the paper money. And I think we're very, very close to some major event that's going to really drive up the price of gold. I also think that we see a lot of articles now about evidence that they've rigged the silver market, and people made profits there. Silver is dirt cheap, but I strongly believe silver is money, and it's just about as strong evidence it's money as gold is, and I think there's going to be a day when people are going to be very happy if they have a few gold coins in their house.
The purest silver producer in the world just announced a few days ago that they're looking into joining in on that class action lawsuit against Deutsche Bank, and I also know that the Swiss Central Bank sold their gold, but they have a $1 billion gold portfolio in the mining stocks now. I want to ask you one more question, Congressman Paul. Alan Greenspan has become somewhat of a gold bug libertarian since he got out. Have you had any run-ins with him? Have you talked to him?
No, I tried to get him on my